Vacancy Legal Recruitment, a refreshingly unique and personal talent agency developed specifically for legal. Dedicated to the sector and with extensive experience working across legal services and legal technology, we bridge the gap between your requirements and top-tier legal talent. Get in touch today and say hello at vacancy.co.uk.
You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Wills and Probate podcast. Today we're talking about auctions. I'm talking about auctions with a new service that's been launched into the sector, Probate.auction. And I have on the podcast today Russell Taylor, Managing Director and Auctioneer at Probate.auction, and Corin Holness, Corporate Relationship Director. Great to have you both on the podcast. We're going to talk about what probate auctions are compared to other auctions, why we might need a dedicated service, and also about educating the sector on auctions as well, many of whom no doubt have watched Homes Under the Hammer or something similar to that, but don't really understand the benefit or options there are, particularly when it comes to probate matters. In the first instance though, Russell, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Probate.auction, please?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thanks for having us on the podcast. Delighted to join you and tell everyone about Probate.auction. Yeah, my name's Russell Taylor. As you say, I'm the auctioneer and managing director of Probate.auction. Been involved in the auction world for coming on for 25 years now. Straight out of university, work experience, and never left. So, as I say, I've been around the auction space for a long, long time. Worked for a major corporate for a long time. Was director of auctions there. Moved around a couple of places and then was approached by my partners in the business to set up Probate.auction, and that was just over a year ago now.
Good afternoon, David. Thank you for the invite onto the podcast. Corin Holness, Corporate Relationship Director at Probate.auction. Been with Russ and Nick and the team now just for over 6 weeks. It was an interesting approach from them and something we'll sort of digress onto as to why as we go through the conversation. But my history within the legal services estates planning space has been in developing and building and maintaining relationships, and through Probate.auction I certainly saw that this was something that met my requirements and demands moving forward.
Let's dive right into the core of the discussion then. So Russell, first of all, tell us about the idea behind Probate.auction. Where did it come about? You said you've been going for about a year.
Yeah, so we've been going just over a year now, set up at the beginning of last year. And we spotted a bit of you say it was an issue in the auction world. So the auction world is mainly made up of government bodies selling, councils, housing associations, and the vast majority of properties sold at auction are via property traders, people who are professionals who buy and sell properties every month and look to flip them on for a quick profit. Now, what my partners and myself had noticed was that over the years, a lot of the properties that the traders are selling at auction actually started life out as a probate property. If we follow the journey of that property, it's gone on the market with the local estate agent at the point of probate being granted. Quite a big chunk of the probate work are properties which are in a dated or poor decorative order. And when it's gone on the market with that estate agent, the agent has got his local friendly property trader who he's rang up and said, "Oh, I've got a good one here for you, run down old house, probate, I think I can get it for you cheap." So the trader will buy it and then flip it in auction 3 weeks later, sometimes making, 40, 50, 60, 70,000 pounds profit. That money is essentially being lost by the estate, by the property not being sold in the correct manner. Obviously, this is a commercial venture, so we are here to make money, but we also saw that there was a real need to provide that service to beneficiaries, professional executors, probate professionals, because we just don't feel they're getting the right advice in the majority of cases. So your unmodernized rundown properties will nearly always do better in an auction environment as opposed to with the local agent. And that's purely because it's entered into a competitive bidding environment, and the person willing to pay the most will get the property. It's not like when it goes on with the agent, and as I say, they call up their friendly trader and it's sold within 2 hours of going on the market. That's one of the main reasons. My partners in the business have been involved in the probate space for a long time. They knew a lot of the intricacies of the probate world. Obviously, I've been involved, as I say, with the auctions for a long time, and it was a match made very easily, to be honest. And we've kind of hit the ground running. You know, the last year has been absolutely explosive. We'll come on to it further on, but we very quickly realised that a big part of our job was actually going to be education to the probate industry about what was best for their properties and how best to dispose of the assets.
I've certainly heard of that point before about the value of that property being lost to the estate because it's gone to auction, it's been sold cheap because it's probate or it's it needs decorating, as you say. What we're not saying here, though, is that every probate property is ripe for auction. We've got to be really clear about which are best to throw into auction and which still need to go through private.
As I say, that's why we're very much, our ethics are to give the best advice. So if we receive 10 calls in the day, we might tell 7 of those calls that their property just isn't right for auction. We're not here just to take on any property and to boost our egos by having a big catalogue. We are very much about giving honest and upfront advice as to how best to sell the property. So if your property is run down, needs work, has an issue, then yes, auctions would be the way forward. If your house is a lovely suburban family house that was renovated a year ago, auctions are not the best place for it.
I think just linking into that, David, the education piece is big, and that's why, as part of our proposition, we will offer free tailored advice on whether that property is suitable for auction or whether, as Russ says, it needs to go on the normal open market.
Is there an issue here where auctions have kind of got this reputation, I suppose? As I say, go back to the homes under the hammer analogy. Auctions have got this reputation where you're just going to get a low ball price and a low ball offer. And if I can sort of take that a step further and challenge you around the growth of the modern method of auction model as well, which has got it's definitely got its pros and cons.
If we look at that, if we look at your question as a whole there, let's start off with traditionally auctions were where the problematic properties which couldn't sell on the open market would go, and they would then go for cheap. Someone would come to buy a deal and off you go. The property's sold, but it's been sold for cheap. Over the years, funnily enough, you've touched on it there, Homes Under the Hammer, as infamous as the program is, it was actually a massive door opener for the auction industry, because suddenly auctions went from being solely the domain of professionals and sort of property traders to suddenly being in the living rooms of every home in the country. And everyone and their cousin thought that watched the program, they make it look very easy, thought, we'll get involved in that, let's buy a property at auction. And I physically saw the changing nature back in the day when we were allowed to have the in-person live auctions in a hotel ballroom in London. You saw the demographics of the crowd change from being a load of men in suits and clipboards to suddenly being mums and dads coming to buy for their kids, amateur investors, amateur buy-to-let investors, every type of buyer you can imagine you get at an auction. It really changed the face of auctions, and it changed the nature of the auctions as well, because suddenly you had all these different competing parties, and every different competing party has a different idea on value. What that obviously then does is just push the value up, or the final hammer price near market value, in fact. What I really want to do is dispel this myth that auctions are where you go to give away property, because that is just simply not true. As I said before, we will 9 times out of 10 we will beat the local estate agents with what they would achieve on an unmodernized house. If we come to the question regarding this new form of I'll say inverted commas auction, the modern method of auction. I don't like to use the word auction because to me it's not an auction. So I've been brought up on the principles of traditional auctions. On the fall of the hammer, contracts are exchanged. 28 days later, the sale is completed. Both parties walk away happy. The buyer's bought and the seller's sold. And it's a real concrete, and that certainty that the auction gives you is what appeals to most of our clients and appeals to most sellers at auction. It's the certainty of sale. The fall of the hammer, a contract is entered into immediately. No one can walk away and it's done. This new idea that came out a few years ago, this modern method, it's a sort of hybrid of traditional auctions and estate agency. So there's no certainty. And what I mean by that, they have an auction, so the property sells to the highest bidder, but the fall of the hammer doesn't represent an exchange of contracts. The fall of the hammer represents an agreement to purchase at that price, subject to you going to get a survey, getting your mortgage. You then have something like a 60-day period as the buyer to get your finance, get your survey done. But if you do those things and you find certain things out during that 60-day period, the buyer can just pull out. They walk away from a reservation fee that they've put down, which is collected by the agent and the auction platform. The seller receives nothing from that reservation fee. If the buyer walks away, the seller is back to square one with a property still owned, nothing in their bank, and they're back to square one. For me, modern method just isn't really, it's not a comparison to auction. It doesn't offer the certainties and the essentially the contractual rights that we do as a traditional auctioneer. I don't want to bash them too much because, you know, there's a place for them in the market clearly. The one thing is nobody knows how well they actually do because they don't produce any results. They don't have any sort of public information about how much over the reserve the property sold for, whether the property actually completed. So a lot of the properties go down as sold, but if you actually were to look at it, it didn't sell because the buyer never went through with it, and it's still owned by the original seller. Another thing I've found over the last few years is quite a lot of these property traders that I spoke about earlier, they will actually purchase out of the modern method, and 3 weeks later that same property will appear in a traditional auctioneers and will then go on and sell for 20-30 grand more. I just don't think modern method is the best route of disposing of properties.
So the challenge here is in educating both practitioners and the wider public, I mean executors for starters, on what their options are. Because I think there's an assumption, as we've established, that you either go to an estate agent or you go to auction.
It's a message I've repeated in many roles, David, with regards to education options so that people can make an informed choice. I think what you have with auctions is you go in your traditional estate agent route is almost, they will try and go as high as possible. Whereas, as Russ has sort of explained, with auction, generally pitching at the right price, which tends to be the other end of the scale, then generates the interest. And therefore what you have is that sliding scale of the top price coming down on agents and that guide price and reserve price that starts lower off with auctions, generating the interest, being a very transparent way of selling a property, because you can see everybody who's bidding at the same time and who you're bidding against, to where ultimately, if it's guided and is at the right price or the right price in the market and the right people in the room, the property achieving more. We had a fine example last month, one of our first charity ones from a big charity. It'd been on the market for 18 months. It hadn't sold. It was guided at 170. It was reserved at 180. And it sold for 216,000 because it generated the right interest and had the right people in the room at the same time. And that education piece is huge, because question out there to most people is, if you're selling a Van Gogh, where do you take it? And generally you take it to auction to get the most interest, to drive the best price for it. And again, I think linking back to Homes Under the Hammer, it's getting people to get away from that misconception that if it's property, it's to get the cheapest value for it.
The thing with estate agents, though, of course, is that they're on Rightmove, they're on Zoopla, they're on the market. Is there a challenge here that with auctions that you're not on those portals, or you're not in front of quite as many people?
Not at all. If anything, it's actually the opposite, the complete opposite. We go out to a much wider market than the local estate agent would. So all of the auction properties are featured on Rightmove. They are featured on Zoopla, on the market, together with specialist auction portals as well, that a lot of traditional auction buyers will look at. I'll give you an example. We had a property back end of last year. It was up in Oldham. It was a really rundown house. A solicitor was acting as professional executor. It was fire damaged. It was in a horrific state, and his first call to us was actually, "Oh, I don't know whether you're going to want this one. I don't even know if you'll be able to sell this." Literally, as soon as the pictures came over and he told us about it, I was running around the room very excited, because to me that is the perfect auction lot. We had a reserve price of £22,000. We guided it at £20,000, ended up selling, I think it was for £88,000 or £89,000, and it needed completely redoing. Properties on that street in good condition were selling for about £110,000, £115,000. Now, this property definitely needed more than £25,000 spent on it. The numbers didn't stack up, but what we created this huge, I mean, I think we ended up having something like 65 paid up registered bidders to bid on this property. We had something like 180 legal pack downloads, and you create a bit of a buzz and a bit of a furore about the property, and everyone then piles in and wants to get involved. This property, if that would have gone on with the local estate agent, the only people that would have looked at that would have been people who were searching on Rightmove for properties in that postcode, that specific postcode. So you're mainly going to be talking about local buyers. Whereas with us going into our catalogue, often what happens is you'll find people will come to you because they've seen one property, but then they end up flicking through your whole catalogue. So we had bidders on that property from as far south as Bournemouth and as far north as Scotland, and absolutely everywhere in between. There were loads of London buyers bidding on it. You know, they had to, "Oh, well, our family live up there and we want to get a place up there." And sort of all sorts of buyers. Just to really reiterate, the misconception out there, I'm sure, is, as you say, the people think, "Oh, well, auctions are a very niche part of the market. They don't get the exposure that an agent would." It's the complete opposite. It really is. The levels of interest in auctions is massive. It really is massive.
One of the things we haven't touched on yet in the conversation is speed. So we're talking at a point in time when private treaty home moves, and albeit it depends on chains and all that kind of business, but it's taking 3, 4, 5 months to move home. But what you said about auctions is that it's a much speedier process, expedites the sale particularly for probate matters, but also it keeps the costs low. Because if you think, particularly if the property is mortgaged, you're paying for that mortgage for the duration of the time that the property is unsold as well, as well as any costs associated with maintenance.
One of the biggest ones that I've come across actually is retirement flats and the continuing payment of the service charge. I mean, it's a real hot topic right now. I've read an article at the weekend actually all about retirement flats. I won't say their name, but one of the largest ones, and the fact that 70% of all their properties have almost halved in value since the day they were built, when they promised the buyers that there'd actually be I mean, I don't know why anyone would believe them, but on the sales particulars, "Oh, this property won't drop in value, it will only go up." Well, nobody can actually guarantee that. They seem to try to. However, people have found the complete opposite, and the longer they sit on these things, the more it ends up costing them. So one of the main principles of auctions is the speed and the time frame involved in them. So from date of instruction to completion, we can have that done in a space of 9 weeks. I think the industry average on the agency, on the open market, I don't know, something crazy, like, what's it, something like 30 something weeks, or
I think just
large.
Adding to that though, is Ross. I mean, I saw some stats last week that said only 1 in 2 properties sold last year
go through
on the normal estate agency market. And I think over 62% of properties were reduced in price at least twice whilst being on the open market as well. So that just adds into what Russ is saying about, the speed element.
Yeah, the speed is definitely to probate professionals as well, with some of these cases dragging on for 2 years or whatever. When it finally comes to sell the assets, the main asset obviously usually being property, if you've then got to go through another whole sort of 6 months to a year process for the beneficiaries and the executors, it's a very time consuming and rather frustrating process. Whereas we hope to put an end to that with the auction sort of framework that you sell the property under.
So what are the practicalities for an executor to take a property to auction?
We will have an initial conversation with either the legal practitioner or the executor or the beneficiaries regarding the property. An appraisal is carried out, an auction appraisal, where we will look at where the reserve price should be set at. A discussion will then be held to finalise that reserve price in agreement with the executor. We have to be in agreement on that reserve price. So if we're not happy with where the executor wants, we will say so, and vice versa. And either a middle ground is found, or unfortunately we won't be able to deal with it if we can't come to an agreement. Once that reserve price is agreed, the usual sort of process to get terms of business signed, that sort of thing. And one of the key elements of selling via us, specifically at Probate Auction, is we have created the framework that allows the estates to essentially sell for nothing, for zero fees. So the selling fee, which is a standard 1.5%, is actually paid for by the buyer. And that's part of the legal documentation, and it's in full agreement with the buyer before they purchase that upon completion they will pay the selling fees. What this guarantees the estate is that they will receive the full amount of the hammer price. So whatever price we sell at, that amount goes to the family, to the executors, to the probate, to the lawyers. So once we've got terms of business back and signed, obviously we carry out full marketing pack for the property. So we'll get internal, external photos. We'll get either a video tour or a virtual 360 tour carried out of the property. We arrange some viewing slots as well. So all of our properties are available for viewing during our marketing period. And we gear up to our launch of all the properties. So that's what we call our catalogue launch. And that is done 3 weeks prior to the auction date itself. The catalogue is launched, and that is when any interested parties can download the legal pack. A solicitor is required to act on behalf of the seller. They will produce a legal pack. This contains any sort of pertinent documents to the sale, and that's available for the public to download. As we get close to the auction date, people start to register to bid. And to do this, they have to put down some card details. So we do put a hold on their cards. So we've got a bit of they can't run away if they buy the property. We do have something. It used to happen quite a lot in the live auction rooms when people had a change of heart as they walked to the contract room. And there's a few classic stories of me chasing people down Oxford Street trying to catch them. But we'll save those for another day. So yeah, people are committed once they've registered to bid. They're fully committed to bid, and we have auction day. The lots are sold. The properties sell to the highest bidders. As I've said all along, the fall of the hammer constitutes the exchange of contracts. We do the paperwork straight after, off to the solicitors, and that's it. It's really as simple as that. It's a very easy, I think what I found from speaking to quite a few legal professionals and professional executors who hadn't really been involved in auctions before, but we sort of got them involved. They just love the cleanliness and the easiness of the process. I think Corin will probably jump in and
the transparency, David, of the whole process with regards to knowing how many people have registered to bid, how many people have downloaded the legal packs, just means that, a week before you can see what interest it's going to be. You can feed that back to the estates, and you can see that changing daily leading up to the auction, which again just underlines why there's no greater transparency than auction for selling a property.
The other key thing, just touching on that in terms of the transparency, is, as I touched on before, with estate agents, there tends to be a lot of funny business goes on with these properties as to who it gets sold to, how it's sold, how exposed to the market it was. And we can't have any of those contentions, because at the end of the day, the property is sold to whoever is willing to pay the most for it on the day. And at the end of the day, that's what a property is worth. Property is not worth what I think it's worth or what you think it's worth. It's worth what the person is willing to pay for it. I know professional executors, solicitors, everyone is very wary of essentially being sued further down the line for mis-selling assets as part of an estate, making sure everything was done in a proper, professional and transparent manner. There can be none of those questions if it has been sold at auction. All the person would say is, well, it was sold to auction. It was sold to the highest bidder. It wasn't sold to my mate's cousin who offered me a brown envelope. There can be none of that. So I find that the professionals absolutely love that transparency element of the auction world.
Part of the reason why we do the podcast is to give organisations like yourselves an opportunity to talk to the Today's Wills and Probate and wider readership and listenership about products and services that you don't come across on a daily basis, or you don't always think about on a daily basis either. So it's been great to have you on the podcast to discuss probate.auction and what you guys do. Clearly, as you've already alluded to, other people do this kind of thing, but because it's very specifically probate orientated, you feel as though you've got a USP there, and more generally talk about auctions as well. So thank you both for joining.
Thank you.
No, thank you, David. And I think one of the reasons that I was attracted to come into work with the guys here at Probate.auction was because of that USP, specialising in a part of the probate process that people do need educating on, so that their knowledge increases and so that they know that that is an option out there. And I think that is the biggest thing. By focusing in it, there is opportunity for estates to deal with Probate.auction. But Ross?
The name says it all, doesn't it? Probate.auction. As I say, I've been involved in auctions for a long time, and sporadically probates would come up to auction direct from the solicitors or from the executors, and they would always just absolutely fly out. I knew that there was a gap in this market, essentially, that a service could be provided to probate professionals that would both make their lives easier, get the families and the beneficiaries in a good place and a happy place where their property, the assets have been sold for a fair price, in a fair way, in an open and transparent environment. I mean, if I could just finish with one story, which was a property we tracked last year. And this wasn't even this just to show auctions and the power of auctions. It wasn't one that we sold, but a property came up in a competitor's auction. And straight away I looked at it and I thought, that looks like that was a probate property. So I started doing a little bit of research into it, and sure enough, it was. It was a probate property that had been left as part of someone's estate, and the beneficiaries of the estate were Cancer Research UK. It was a house in East London. When I did my research, I could see it was being sold by a trader at auction. But when I delved a little deeper, it became apparent that the property had been purchased from a local estate agent, and it had been purchased for £390,000. When I sort of looked into it using a few systems we've got access to, the property had actually appeared on the market for 2 hours before it said sold on the open market. 3 weeks later, it then went into the rivals auction, competitors auction, and the final hammer price was £471,000. So that is £81,000 that has been taken out of Cancer Research budget funding, legacy funding, and has gone into the pocket of a trader. Now, I'm not saying he's done anything wrong. He's just playing the game as he does. But what it just highlights is that there are people being taken advantage of, and we wanted to stop that. And we feel like we're making some good strides into doing that. We've clearly hit a bit of a nerve, both on the bad side and the good side. So, obviously estate agents and rival auctioneers are a little threatened, shall I say, by us. Solicitors and probate professionals who hadn't been introduced to this world are absolutely gobsmacked with how quickly and how easy the process is. And I don't think they'll look back from coming to auctions in future.
The Today's Wills and Probate podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todayswillsandprobate.co.uk. My thanks to Russell and to Corin. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.